Welcome to Small Spark Theory. This podcast is designed as a collection of thoughts, ideas, and practical tips on using marginal gains to help your agency new business endeavours. Small Spark Theory is hosted and created by Lucy Mann, founder of Gunpowder Consulting.
Welcome back to Small Spark Theory. We're back in the pod today at White City Place. Hopefully no building work today, so far so quiet, but we'll see how we go. Now, so far in this series, we've been discussing how we can improve our agency, marketing and new business performance, specifically by looking for marginal gains. And many of the conversations that we've had so far have focused primarily on generating opportunities, so raising our profile, motivating our teams and ourselves, engaging prospects. But without doubt, the biggest opportunity to make tangible improvements is to improve our approach to pitching. So I'm delighted to have Tony Spong here with me in the studio today. For those of you that haven't worked with Tony before, he leads the integrated design and below-the-line consultancy at AAR. AAR were the original client agency intermediary service. Launched back in 1975, they've been pioneering client agency relationships best practice ever since. Tony joined AAR in 2007, having previously worked for over 20 years in senior marketing and agency roles at Royal Mail and Proximity. So we couldn't ask for a better expert witness to give us an insight into how we can up our pitching game. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks for joining us today. It would be really helpful if you could just give us a little bit of background on how you got to the AAR.
Well, that's very interesting. I started as a graduate when in the days in the 80s, early 80s, just being a graduate was a handy career move. So I joined NatWest Bank as it happened, not really knowing what I wanted to do. But as part of the graduate scheme, you get sent on all these lovely courses, one of which was marketing, which I fell in love with, and then asked to be placed somewhere in marketing. They ignored me for about 18 months, and then I was lucky enough to get into the new product development department, which opened my eyes perfectly to everything from market research, testing, prototyping, and then ultimately creative, coming up with names, brand look and feel, etc., as well as the advertising and marketing, which slowly drew me towards the advertising department at NatWest. And those are the guys who had the direct relationships with the agencies. And then I got to see up close what creativity was all about, and I wanted to go and work for an agency.
Wow. And
eventually I got the lucky break and went to work for an agency, and then I spent the next 10 years in agencies, basically sitting in the creative department.
Lovely. Well, what a great start.
No, it was fantastic, and I learnt, quite a lot at the time, I must admit, and a lot of it's still valuable today, I'm glad to say.
Now, the intermediary landscape has changed considerably, certainly since AAR started back in 1975, and certainly in the 25 years that I've been working with agencies, it's changed quite a lot. What are the biggest shifts that you've noticed in clients' requirements from agencies or from their selection process in particular?
I think the relationships that clients want from their agencies has shifted as much to do with the commercial agenda as anything else. If you go back to my start when we started in new product development, i.e. we were told by a bunch of consultants, I think it was McKinsey's at the time, that we didn't have enough products to sell. So we had to go and make some more products. So we had a 40, 50-man team making financial products back then. What's interesting for me is 20, 30 years further on, we're doing it again. We're going through another industrial revolution, if you like, with the digital scene. And it's prompting the birth of new products, new services, new ways to deliver, just new experiences for brands to basically extract value from the market, be that customers, prospects, or whatever. So I think the big change is how intermediaries have to stay in tune with the wider commercial agendas. It's not so much that the way clients ask for it has changed. If they are really, really stuck, they ask their mates and say, do you know anyone who can do this? In the same way that we say, do you know a good builder or a good plumber, someone who can plaster or renovate your garden or whatever? It's the same process. You ask your mates first. If your mates let you down or they just don't know, then you go to the next thing. And eventually someone says, well, why don't you ask these guys? And in the intermediary space, there's a good half a dozen of us all do it slightly differently. And therefore we are pitching more and more. So I think that's perhaps another big difference. We pitch probably 1 in 3, 1 in 4 times ourselves, because due diligence doesn't just rest with the choice of agency, but actually the choice of partner to help you get the right agency.
Right.
So I think that's one of the biggest things. But fundamentally, if you stand far enough back, you'll see cycles of activity. So you mentioned brand earlier. That's one of my areas. Brand wasn't really on the radar for many clients for the last 4 or 5 years. All of a sudden, the last 18 months, it's just come front and centre, because you've got brands that have acquired lots of other brands and need to look at how they consolidate all of that. Equally, they're coming under threat from disruptors. So these young upstart businesses who are coming into the market and are using it very much as a defensive mechanism, like who am I? Really restating who am I and fighting back, in many cases quite successfully. Equally, you've got the young upstarts coming into marketing for the first time. Their product or service idea has worked pretty well, but now they're bumping into competition. So if you think about, I don't know, the travel industry, for example, you've got everything from TripAdvisor now selling hotel space to Booking.com, Trivago, Expedia, Hotel.com, Kayak, all that sort of stuff. So you've got about 12 players. What's the difference? Not a lot. So again, the reason for branding and brand personalities and brand purpose suddenly becomes key. How do I position myself against my competition? That's a question that people have asked since branding started. So it's not a new need, it's just a different group of people needing it.
Yes.
And you just have to take into consideration their context as opposed to the context of 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. My experience with AAR over the years has very much been in a pitch scenario many times over the years. But I'm aware that you work with, certainly with brands in other ways outside of that pitch environment.
So one of the other areas that sort of came into our radar about 10 years ago, in fact, when I started, my colleague started in this field in particular, and that's about, why do we always have to go to pitch? So we do a whole piece of consultancy now about maintaining the relationship. So we go in and do a 360 audit with clients and agencies. We normally suggest and recommend that they pay half each, because that shows a mutual commitment to the whole process. And this isn't about trying to pick holes necessarily, it's about trying to be constructive and to try and help clients and agencies repair some niggles that just get in the way and start to irritate. And we found in many instances that it's a very small thing that can just, if not dealt with, build up to a big thing, and ultimately a breakdown in trust, and therefore ultimately a separation. So our aim is to say, well, let's see if we can avoid this going to pitch. And then you pick up all sorts of things that agencies and indeed clients do that are just silly, and then it becomes stupid, and then it becomes idiotic, and then it becomes, it just escalates from there. But I think that's a big area that we've got involved in, rather than jettisoning everything each and every time, because that's kind of wasteful, and that slows things down at a time when we have to move quite quickly. You can lose a lot of momentum by putting things out to pitch. You can lose 6 months quite easily for a client.
Yes.
And that's too long.
So your point about avoiding pitches is a really interesting one, because lots of the agencies that I talk to talk about pitching with a really heavy heart, because they know it's very time consuming and it's difficult to get a pitch through the agency easily. It can be a painful process.
It can indeed. I mean, and one of the things that we've identified is that there's a different mindset if you're the incumbent versus the person or the agency trying to grab the business off someone.
Yes.
And it occurred to me in a coffee shop talking to a guy, and the penny dropped, and I felt quite ashamed that I hadn't thought of this earlier, to be honest, which was all the training out there from you guys and a lot of other people. We all help agencies win business off an incumbent. We very rarely sit down with the incumbent to tell them how to defend the business. So we've got a guy who I met, and he's actually a hypnotherapist. And it's all a bit like sports psychology. It's all about getting into the right mindset. And he told me this one story completely by accident, which we've now turned into something much bigger, which was that he was working with an individual, the CEO, as an individual coach and consultant. And she'd called him in because she was very stressed about their biggest account going up for pitch, and she had 40 people on that team who she feared she may have to make redundant. So she said, can you come in and calm me down and all this sort of stuff and do a better good sort of well-being on myself? And at the end of that conversation and that session, he said, well, who's looking after the 40 people? And she went, oh my God, how selfish have I just been? No one. And what can you do? And he said, I've never done it with 40 people before, but let's have a go.
Mm-hmm.
So he started work with the 40 people. He came back to her a week later and said, I recommend you take these 3 people off the team.
Wow.
Which he said, fine, I'll do that. And they went on to pitch and retained the business.
Wow.
And it was all about making sure that you don't feel sorry for yourself.
Yes.
That you've been, and you hate the client because they put this up for pitch, and actually turning that thing into a positive. So those 3 people he removed were the most negative people who wouldn't let go of the fact that it had been put up for pitch.
Right.
And the danger was it was going to infect the rest of the pitch team.
And hold everybody back. So
certainly one lesson there is it's probably a good idea to change the team if you have to repitch, regardless of what that feels like. Not in all cases, but pretty much getting fresh blood is going to be important. But it's a little seminar that we run now. It's part of our annual series of seminars. We've run it twice now, and the impact's been very interesting. It's a slightly odd angle to come in at, but it's proved thought-provoking and beneficial for a lot of agencies. So being the incumbent, all is not lost, but you've got to do something positive about it if you're going to go into the pitch. And we always tell clients that if there is no way on earth that agency will win it, then tell them right at the beginning.
Yeah. Because
we tell them they will spend twice as much on trying to retain the business as the agency is trying to win the business. And when you give them some figures about how much an agency will spend on a pitch and then say double it, for the incumbent, they have no idea how much agencies spend.
No.
In terms of equivalent man hours. So we say, look, lance the boil straight away. Let them spend that money on winning some more business.
Yeah.
Sometimes the clients will go on and do that, but they're scared of business as usual.
Yeah.
That's what they're scared of because they haven't really planned it. It's a bit of a distressed purchase. By the time they get to pick up the phone to us or anyone else. And as a result, they haven't really thought about how they're going to manage business as usual, how they're going to do the transition from one agency to another. No. They oversimplify it, thinking I could say goodbye on a Friday and hello on a Monday and all will be well. And of course, with the volume of work most agencies are picking up these days for clients, that's not as simple as that. And too often clients will come to us and say, oh, it's all right, I've fired the incumbent. And you go, how long's the notice period? And they say 3 months. And I said, this will probably take 3 months to do it properly. And therefore, you've got no transition period at all. No. And they look at you blank and cold, sweats and all that sort of thing. So they don't do this that often, clients. I think agencies make the mistake of thinking clients pitch all the time. And it's something that clients do very rarely. So if you think about it, if you're a middle-ranking marketeer or even a junior, the reason you are then often pulled into that team is because there's a new sense of direction, because there's a new marketing director, because there's a new strategy, because there's a new agency they're recruiting to fill the new strategy. Therefore, the pitch has already been done when you join, and by the time you've built your CV on that strategy, you've moved on before that goes up for repitch. So it's very few people in the wider stakeholder team who've ever worked through a pitch before.
There's a big difference between a pitching process where there is an intermediary involved, like yourselves, or one of the other intermediaries, where it's a facilitated process, end to end. You are guiding the client, but you're also guiding the agencies who are taking part as well. So everybody is given the opportunity to perform at their best, as opposed to a direct pitch where an agency is working without an intermediary to facilitate. And quite often there's a situation where the agencies are given a brief at the beginning and a pitch date, however many weeks hence, and there's no contact really in between, and they have to sort of operate almost sort of blindfolded and then walk in on pitch day and do a big reveal, which is the most unrealistic. To me, it seems the most unrealistic way of working, and it's not a scientific test. It doesn't feel like the right way to measure an agency. What's your experience been?
One of the things we say to agencies, I said, even if you never get a brief through the AAR, or any intermediary for that matter, go and talk to an intermediary. Go and test yourselves against what they see. Our job is ultimately very comparative. The confidence we give a client is that any agency we put on the list can do the job. So now you can sit back and relax on the capability front. Now it's much more about how do they go about it. So it's a very different setup. But for me, and having done it now for quite some time and been on both sides, it's a pretty strenuous test. It's a bit like the Champions League, because we are only going to put the top agencies in who can meet that brief. Doesn't mean to say the highest turnover agencies, we do small briefs, thousands of pounds up to hundreds of thousands and to millions of pounds. So we get all sorts of lovely inquiries, which keeps, from a personal point of view, the interest going. So it's not just big briefs that we work on. We're very good at understanding where an agency sits in its competitor set and how it is likely to compete against the others. And because we get that chance, we can advise any agency on how to compete in another channel, fundamentally. So we have a lot of agencies who come in and road test their credentials with us. I have specific days set aside each month, literally just to do that. They come in and they go, here are our creds, and I say that's rubbish for these reasons. That's not going to be competitive in these situations, etc., etc. But there's the thing that makes you special, so make your whole story around that. So until agencies have really experienced every single channel, the way they pitch is not fully tested, and our job is to help them short-circuit that to some extent. When they're pitching directly to the client, you've got to remember that the client hasn't necessarily done this before. It's slightly different for FMCG and the big, what we would call universities of marketing. So Mars, Nestle, Unilever, P&G, Diageo, all that lot, they are trained to manage rosters of agencies. They're very picky, but they're very used to people coming and pitching to them and going, we'll have you on the roster. Whether you'll get any work or not is a different matter, but they're very good at that. So if anyone has got that on their LinkedIn profile, then chances are they'll be reasonably smart about how they go about that process. But everyone else, it's a lot more difficult and a lot more infrequent. And therefore, they don't necessarily know how to they may do it with the best intentions, but they won't necessarily manage the process as well as you would necessarily like. So you've got to understand that context and be proactive. So if a client isn't going to let you talk to them at all, that should be one of your criteria. Yeah. And then you decide whether that's a yes or a no for you as an agency. For some people, that might be a yes. For others, it would be a no. For me, I'd just say no, because they go, well, what sort of relationship? But try and understand the why that's sitting behind that. Clients are very nervous and excited about pitching. They're nervous because, am I saying that I don't know what to do anymore? Am I saying I can't manage an agency? So they'll punish themselves for the reason why there's a pitch. So they can come in a bit tense and a bit disappointed in where they've got to, that they've allowed it. So they're quite frustrated at that time. What you've got to do is turn up the excitement and go, no, you've made the right decision, because I'm about to make you better at your job. Right. I always say to agencies, why does he want to come and work with you Monday to Friday, 9 to 5? What's that bit of your pitch? That's the excitement. The hard bit is the journey, that Monday to Friday bit. Get him or her wanting to leap out of bed to come and work with you. That's what you've got to, that's the excitement. So tap into that emotional part of the journey. If you can do that and allay any fears in terms of what's the risk-benefit equation, then you should be fine. So clients will get very excited and then go, why can't I do it? Why shouldn't I do it? And if that drags them back to the safe option, then so be it. But bear in mind that there are clients who will just need that extra help or nudge to go, I'm going to go for the slightly riskier option as far as they're concerned. It's relative. What to you might seem risky seems very risky to them. What seems risky to them might not seem risky to you. And it's just getting that emotional balance right for them to persuade them to change agencies.
You talked a little bit about reasons for going ahead or turning things down, and one of the things that we work with agencies on a lot is making sure they've got a robust set of lead qualification criteria. I'd be interested to know your take on the best qualification criteria that an agency should have.
Well, I'm sure you've told your listeners before, but money is one. Yeah. Is it a creative or strategic opportunity? I.e., is this the opportunity to test your thinking and you will get ultimately some reward. So charities play on that a huge amount. They're very prepared to allow agencies, in return for virtually pro bono, or at least at cost work, to go, no, you can come up with some really, really strong creative in exchange for, which is why some charity advertising is some of the best, because that's the trade-off. What is that level of interest and reward? Both for, it may be for testing your B team out. You've got a pitch squad, you've got an A team. How do you test the B team? So you may well decide to strategically take on board a pitch to go, no, I don't care if I lose. This is about pre-season friendlies, if you like, to use a football analogy. And then, ultimately, if you've got the resource to actually manage the pitch. So there's a number of criteria, and that will differ by agency. But I had a recent experience where this agency had over-optimised their website so much that by natural search through Google, they were getting so many leads, but they were taking all the leads, and they'd lost 6 pitches in a row.
Ouch.
And when I looked at the criteria they were using, it was way too loose. Virtually it was, is the client breathing and have they got a budget? And that was about it. So what we did was we sit down with them and walk through all their examples and try to work out a slightly tighter level of criteria that they could then use in order to concentrate on the ones that they really needed to win, if you like, as well as wanted to win. And fortunately, that's turned out to be successful. So they've won a couple since the workshop. But it's just making sure that you don't get on the treadmill of accepting every lead as it comes in, and that there is someone, if you like, is the editor-in-chief or the decision-maker. If you haven't got a dedicated new business person or whatever it is, someone needs to ultimately be the objective person. Go, why are we doing that?
Yeah.
But yes, you've got to have robust criteria. Otherwise, you'll just get yourself in a mess, and you'll be pitching and writing documents at 4 a.m. And that's bad enough with day-to-day work without adding pitching on top of that.
No. So we need to talk about Google. Now, I know from experience, and the example that you've just shared there about incoming new business leads that come through your website, in my experience, they need interrogating far more, because you know so little, and opportunities that you have pursued, you know a lot more. Or if they've come through your network, you know it's probably at a point of need, or you know a little bit about the people involved. And if you've been pursuing them, then you've already got a whole load of information. But things that come in unsolicited through the website, they need a bit more interrogation. And in my experience, that the conversion rate is lower because there's going to be some wastage in there. Now, that said, I talk to lots of agencies when I'm talking about improving their website, and they say, well, no one's going to be finding us on Google. Tell us your experience.
Well, trust me, they do. And actually, it hit me about 2 years ago, yes, just over 2 years ago, where a client rang me up and said, I've just tried Googling CRM agencies in Manchester and I can't find any. And I said, well, there's only one, and they've got a competitor client. So fortunately, I was able to reassure her that I did know all the agencies in Manchester, and explain to her why she couldn't find what she was looking for. But if she hadn't rung me, I would not have been able to have that, and I'd have lost that lead to Google. Because if you think about the way it works, the CMO says, we're going to pitch. Thanks very much. Everyone's told me that why we should pitch. I will sign this off. Right, Janet, Sally, Tom, etc. You pull this together, because I'm obviously too busy day to day. Here's some names I may have thought of, etc. So the poor junior goes, I don't know what to do. So what's their reference point for life today? Even my dad stands in the pub and goes, Google that, Tony, if we've got a question. So they go, well, I'll start with Google, and if Google gives me the answer, I've done the job.
So thinking, in my experience, one of the things that tends to let agencies down when they get into a pitching situation is the planning. Either they don't plan, or they just start the process too late. What's been your experience?
It's very, very easy to spot someone who did something last night.
Yeah.
If you think about the process starting with answering an RFI questions or submitting some creds, by way of the client just checking the capabilities and the broad areas that they are thinking about for the pitch. One of the reasons that we like an RFI or a cred stage is it allows the client to see at a safe distance what the market is currently doing against their brief. What we try and help the client to understand is that the market is way ahead of where they currently are. We try and do that in the nicest way, i.e. non-threatening or pointing out that it might be sick, just to say that there's a lot of people in the market solving problems like yours, and there's 3 or 4 maybe different ways of doing it. So credentials actually become quite an interesting first meet without actually meeting anyone, and therefore it's always interesting for me to see how devoid of personality so many of the credentials are, and how many agencies just cut and paste and deliver something that they've said many times before without too much thinking or tailoring. As a result, those agencies don't get very far, even at the first stage. So making first impressions is very important. And if I get 8 creds in from different agencies, it's very easy to see which ones have got a process and which ones haven't got a process for managing a pitch. So I already know who's going to be trouble and who's going to be easy to work with throughout the process. You can tell by the different hands that have been involved. So for instance, you can see one set of creds can have 4 or 5 different people. So someone will talk with I, we, you, the agency name or whatever. So they have 5 different persons,
Yes.
voices if you like,
Yes.
running throughout their creds, versus another one which is beautifully crafted, is talking to the client and delivering it in a way that answers the questions the client hasn't even thought of because they didn't know to ask those questions. But the agency's delivered the narrative in a very supportive way for that client. That takes organisation. That means the moment the RFI lands on your desk as a new business person, within 24 hours, if it's an intermediary, you should be ringing them up, asking them lots of questions. The good ones ring me within 24 hours. The even better ones send me something within 48 hours as a sketch to say, am I on the right track?
Yeah.
What they're fishing for is, I know who else is on the list. They don't, because I won't tell them. They're fishing for me to point them in the right direction that will make them the most competitive they can be in that comparative situation.
But that's an interesting insight, though, for agencies that are filling out those early stage forms, because I can guarantee you for a lot of people that are doing that, they're just focusing on, it's Friday afternoon,
Correct.
I've got to turn this around. It's a checkbox exercise, and it's everything but a checkbox exercise.
I remember someone saying to me, Tony, I just thought it was a chat when they met a client for the first time. And I said, no, it's way more complicated than that,
Yeah.
Stephen.
Yeah.
And it's the same with when this process starts. It's either going to be, it's a new client syndrome. So be aware, is this client new? Because if he's new, the chances are he's had to pitch to the board of that brand to say, this is the direction you should go in. If you hire me, this is how I believe we can make improvements. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given him the job.
Yeah.
You've got a new requirement. So it may be there's competition that's affecting a client brand and they've got to do something about it. So they've got to fight back. So it's a different scope of work than the one they've been currently working on. So again, understanding what's going on in that business at that time, it might mean that what you can visibly see is not what they want because they need something completely different. It could be statutory. So be very aware that it's procurement driven. Quite often it can be statutory. So the contract is up every 3 years.
Yeah.
With the option of a 2-year roll-on. So is it 3 or 5 years since they pitched this business? Chances are it's statutory. And that takes you down a slightly different road. And ultimately, it could just be dissatisfaction. So how do you find that out? So again, it's about building and using your network of contacts and the ways of seeing what's going on in the market to try and understand why is this pitch happening in the first place.
Yeah. Because there's always a trigger, isn't there?
There's always a trigger.
It could be, as you said, it could be share price, it could be new CEO, it could be mergers and acquisitions happening in the background.
We're very aware that there is no line in any client's budget which says, here's a load of money I'm going to give to the AAR.
Yeah.
Right? Never. It's a distress purchase.
Yeah.
And which is why trying to get a client to change direction wholeheartedly is actually very difficult, because if on average clients have got 16 or 17 agencies, the bigger ones, you can't change all of that at the same time. So what tends to happen is that they If they break a dinner plate, they just want a replacement dinner plate. They're not going to change the whole dinner service at the same time. So in that context as well, it's about how do you play nicely with other agencies. So understand the context. It's vitally important. Don't just walk in blind just because they've said, can you come and tell me about what you do? And leave it up to the client to make a decision. You've got to find a way of leading them. So if you are an agency that purports to be the expert in what you do, how do you become an expert? By asking good questions that the client should have thought to ask.
Let's think about some of the best examples of agency pitching that you've witnessed.
Again, there's no silver bullet, but if we look at 4 elements that we think make a difference. One is the content of what you're going to say, clearly, is important. So that has to match up to what we're talking about. The team, you have to be a team before they decide whether they could be a team with you. So your team, how good is that? It's behaviour. So how does it behave as a team? What's the dynamics there? So one is the skill set and one is then the behaviour. And interestingly, the other factor that does have an impact in a pitch situation, and it's not always possible, but the environment.
Right.
So we're currently sat here today in a very hot room, right?
We are.
So we have to periodically stop and open the door.
Yeah.
Imagine what that's like in a pitch situation.
Yes.
And it works both ways. So if the agency is lucky enough to have the pitch at their premises, you've got complete and utter control of your environment.
Yeah.
Don't waste that opportunity.
Yeah.
If you happen to be pitching at the client's premises, which is often the case because stakeholders arrive just for the pitch or whatever, go and get photographs of the room.
Yeah.
See how big the boardroom table is in relation to the screen.
Yes.
Because in today's modern offices, Samsung TVs seem to be the flavour of the month. But actually, interestingly, they're nowhere near as big as the pull-down screen of yesteryear with the projector.
Yeah.
And as a result, if it's a long boardroom table, the person at the back cannot see on the screen. So what we do is we say, make sure that you get photographs of them or get them sent to you. Today with iPhones, etc., it's relatively easy.
Yeah.
So make sure you understand the environment. Make sure you've got half an hour to set up beforehand so you can, again, make any minor adjustments. Because the environment and the control of it allows you to put energy into a meeting. And it's a vital area. So going back to best pitch stories, on content, if you're about to really challenge the client, you can either do one of 2 things. You can either do the murder in the first scene or the murder in the last scene. Murder in the first scene is you're going to tell the client there's going to be a murder and what you're going to kill. And then you'll repair the story after that. So you can get them really excited about how big a thing this is about to be.
Yeah.
And the other one is the slightly sneakier one, which slowly but surely you realise that something's building up to something and the murder is at the end. Both are perfectly valid.
Yeah.
Both are very exciting to be in.
Yeah.
The most dramatic one I sat in was a murder in the first scene, where literally the global CEO of this agency said to the client, this is going to be really, really tough because we're going to ask you to do something that's not going to be easy, etc., etc., and just built up this whole thing. They then showed a beautiful mood film to get them used to the idea that they were about to let go of something that was fundamentally precious to their business, and then directed them to a very small part of their business that they wanted to bring front and centre. So it was a really, really bold move, but it's the only agency in the 10 years I've been at the AAR who got a spontaneous round of applause at the end of the pitch.
Being in the room, did you have that feeling as if they'd won it in the first 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a pretty dramatic opening.
Yeah.
And it just kept building and building, and then they backed it up. So they said, right, that's the murder. How did that happen?
Yeah.
Where did we go? And then they brought in all the evidence and the witnesses for the prosecution and all this sort of stuff. And then slowly but surely they go, and this is why it's safe to do so. And they just backed it up.
And we were talking earlier that really for agencies, this is such an important opportunity that if you're going to get involved in a pitch, you've got to be in it 100% or just not bother at all.
Correct.
It's not just about losing that revenue, but it's also about the time and the resource that it's cost the agency to be involved, which we often kind of sweep under the carpet a bit, but that's, as we mentioned before, that's significant. If you're going to be involved in a pitch, you've got to be in it for 100%, and you've got to get those seemingly small things sorted out, because I think when an agency is so busy trying to come up with the solution for that pitch that they overlook a lot of those small things like the team dynamic and some of the preparation things, because they're so busy working on the answer or what they think is the answer, that a lot of those other things get left by the wayside.
Yeah, you need to nominate a pitch doctor, to coin a phrase, someone who sits outside the day-to-day workings of trying to solve the brief, who can sit there objectively and say, I'm sorry, that just doesn't make sense, or that's not quite right, or should we do it in a different order, or whatever, so that they can sit there objectively and ask those questions of the team, who will be so wound up in trying to come up with the answer, they'll forget those. And I mean, one agency told me that their aim is always to finish a week before the pitch, so they spend a week rehearsing.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what they can find in a week through rehearsals. So one agency, I mentioned the Samsung televisions earlier, and this agency had suddenly looked at the room again and realised the television was very small and the boardroom table was very long. And they actually thought, well, hang on a minute, they're not going to be able to see.
Yeah.
So this was for, I think it was a CRM pitch. So they did two things. One is they made sure the number of creative items equaled the number of clients in the room. So rather than have one item passed around 5 or 6 times, to speed that up, they made sure everyone had one each.
Yeah.
So when they discussed it, people weren't reading it, they all had it at the same time. So that was sensible. But for me, the real attention to detail winner was when they got to a complicated slide, they'd printed out on A3 sheets of paper the complicated slide. And in the top right-hand corner of the PowerPoint slide was a gold circle. And they said, every time you see a gold circle, just look down and the slide will be in front. So we all got a deck of slides in A3 format where they were complicated. And they said, right, if you'd like to turn to the next one, they turned to the next one. And that attention to detail, as far as the client was concerned, was the small thing that was a big thing.
Yeah.
Which is if they take that care and attention to their own work, what are they going to do for the work for us? And that ticks a massive box.
Which essentially is just managing the user journey, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Which is what agencies talk about all the time.
But you've got to give yourself time to have that thought.
Yeah.
And that's what they created. They'd set a deadline 2-3 days before the pitch date to allow themselves to go through with a fine-tooth comb what are all these other things that will help us win the pitch. And that was one of the fastest decisions the clients ever made.
Really?
So we were able to ring them and they were still on the train going back.
Oh, fantastic.
To the office, and we were able to say you've won before they'd got.
Lovely. That must be the best part of your job, right?
Yeah.
So, attention to detail on the room and the dynamics, and I know that horrible thing, I can't stand it when you're watching a presentation and someone says, well, you probably can't see that, but how difficult is it to get something on the screen that's the right size that people in the room are going to see?
And it's subconscious. I mean, we all go, for instance, there's always a dull bit that everyone goes, I've got the dull bit, and makes a joke of presenting the dull bit. And I scream in my head, no, your massive opportunities to make that the most interesting. Yeah. So I remember on another pitch where it was an integrated pitch, so we had advertising, CRM, digital media, all this sort of stuff. And this guy in this ill-fitting grey suit with grey shirt and grey tie was in the room. He's clearly uncomfortable, dressed up for this meeting, and he was the data guy, so everyone was dreading the data bit. He was magnificent, absolutely magnificent, and you could see some of the other people who didn't deal with him day to day on their own team go, is this going well? It seems to be going well. The client seems to be nodding and laughing at all that, and they just had these fixed sort of Stepford wives grins, on their faces, thinking, I'm sure I've no idea why this is going well, but it seems to be going well, so I'll just keep nodding and smiling to support him. Yeah. He came from Prague, Czech Republic, and he was astonishing. So the very first thing the client said in the taxi after this meeting was, he has to be in the pitch.
He has to be on the team, yeah.
So one of the things we talk to clients about is, who did you like in the team and who didn't you like in the team? Yeah. And if we're lucky enough working with bigger agencies, I said, look, don't panic, we can change members of the team. And I said, agencies are fine with that. They understand it's about, and equally, they might ring me up and go, didn't really like you either. So it works both ways. Yeah. But no, team dynamics, very, very important. But you don't often know where the star is going to come from.
No.
But so as that was always, again, a lesson. Don't set yourself up to fail by saying this is going to be the boring bit.
No.
Because what does that give client permission to go and get another coffee, stare out the window, doodle, and all that sort of stuff? No. Because that's a quick win. actually.
Yeah.
Because pretty much every agency says that's the boring bit every time. How do you make it sound interesting? And therefore, again, it's a whole team performance. Because you go, why have you brought the boring bloke into the room? What's the point of that? Everyone's got a role to play. Everyone's going to be interested. Everyone's going to be passionate about what we do. You don't have to like gymnastics to appreciate what someone can do on a mat or a floor or the rings or whatever. You can appreciate someone's skills even though you'll never do it yourself and never go and watch it. You can go, that guy's pretty good at what they do, and that's, you can do a round of applause. That's all they're asking for.
Very good. We've got some amazing pieces of advice here for our listeners. Are there any other tips you've got for better pitch practice where they can find some marginal gains?
There's a number of areas. One, I think if you think about remembering what clients think about as they go, what's the context of them? They'll probably ultimately post-rationalise why they've chosen you. So to some extent, you've got to give them the ammunition to justify you at the coffee machine. So why have you chosen X agency or Y agencies? Well, because they do this, or they've given us this option or that option, or they've done some cracking work over here and can't wait to work with them or whatever. So what's the thing you're going to leave them with so that they can post-rationalise?
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Why they want to choose. And hopefully it's the exciting thing and not the de-risky thing.
Yeah. I'm
reminded of a client where we had a very close pitch between two agencies in the end. The client on the score sheet chose the agency that came second on everyone's sheet, basically. Because obviously the one that was going to really, really, really make a mark was the one who ultimately polarises people.
Right.
Because that's what being nervous is all about.
Yeah.
As a client. You go, we couldn't do that. And someone goes, oh yes, I can't wait till we do that. So what you tend to find on score sheets, which is one of the reasons we talk clients through it quite a lot, is that beware of the polarising one, because they'll end up coming second.
Yeah.
And the second ends up coming first.
Yeah.
And that's deemed the safe option. So we had a situation where on a Friday night we were winding up, we'd had the wash-up session, we took all the scorecards in and then shared the scoring with the client, and agency X was winning. And we looked around the room, go, everyone happy? And yeah, it was just mumbling. And you just knew emotionally, they went, oh, that's a shame. Because basically they wanted someone else to take the risk. Anyway, the agency that was the most exciting, as in most dangerous and made you most nervous, was second. Come Monday morning, and fair play to the VP of marketing, called her team together and said, I don't know about you guys, but I couldn't stop thinking about that agency over the weekend whilst I was raking the leaves in my garden. How does everyone else feel? And they went, yeah, no, we were the same. And he goes, right. So we got a phone call, and we hadn't told the agencies at this stage where we'd got to.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Well, which is one of the reasons why we always say give it the overnight test or the weekend test or whatever, because it's about getting used to something new. And if it's that scary and that big a leap, then it's not going to be easy. If you haven't done it before, you will think of a million things why you shouldn't do it. But then there's equally the other bit, which is, wow, what could happen if we could do it? It's no worse than going, I don't know, travelling or going to a foreign country for the very first time and going, I wonder what the food's like, and you pack bacon and Kellogg's cornflakes. Tea bags. All those sorts of things. Vegemite.
Yeah.
That sort of thing if you're from Australia. And it's because we're just nervous. And then in the end you go, why did I bring the Vegemite? I don't need it.
Yeah. And
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So think about the post-rational. Just make sure you land something.
Yeah.
Be memorable for something.
Yeah.
And even if you're wrong for this client, and providing it's not wrong as in you're always going to get it wrong, sometimes being different is not a problem. It means you could get a phone call in 3 years' time saying, by the way, do you still do that thing you pitched to me 3 years ago? And you go, yeah. They'll come back to you.
Yeah.
So you can be memorable and good, and memorable and bad, and memorable and spot on.
Yeah.
So for that context, I've had clients say to me, look, this really is the agency for today. That one is the agency for the day after tomorrow. I don't think I can deliver my side to do that sort of work yet, but I love what they did.
And presumably for an agency who conducts themselves brilliantly in a pitch, but for whatever reason isn't the agency of choice for that client, presumably if they do a stunning job anyway, then they're going to win you over and mean that next time you have another opportunity.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. A lot of agencies are really nervous about that one. And to be honest, it doesn't matter at all. I don't have to like the agency to know that they're capable of doing the job. I'm more embarrassed for them,
right?
To be honest. So there's the pitch I'm working on at the moment where I have left an agency out, because they just haven't done themselves justice in each pitch. They are way better than they are capable of pitching. Yeah. I've had a phone call with one of the global players in the agency, and the plan is to have a drains up workshop, but I'm not going to put them through it again because of the money. Yeah. It's not because I don't like them, it's because I don't think they are organised enough to spend their money in the most appropriate way and win against the people who are on that list. Yeah. They might have bought all the best players, but they aren't a team yet. No. And they're not, their attention to detail in the things that matter, their awareness and EQ, if you like, in that area is not strong enough at the moment.
I'd like to know what piece of advice you've been given that's really stuck with you.
I remember in my first agency, the one piece of advice was, which has always stuck with me actually, which is there'll be a moment in this meeting where there is a silence. Don't fill the silence. So it's an old-fashioned sales technique around make the client blink first. Hold your nerve, I guess is what it's saying. Trust in what you've pitched. Don't sell after the pitch, which I think is what the textbooks and coaching says. And it hit me then, and I laughed inwardly because of course previously this was my first agency, so I'd been a client and was fully aware of the technique that had been now played on me, and I smiled knowingly, and it worked a treat. I was in one of the first pitches I was in, and the agency team presented, and my job was literally pouring coffee and things like that, and they said, it'll go quiet, Tony, and whatever you do, don't say a word or we'll fire you, basically. And I was biting my lip and everything else. And it worked. And the client went, yep, that's good, we'll do that. Yeah. And it's worked. So that's always stuck with me. And I think it manifests itself in slightly different ways, but the principle is still there. Yeah. Yeah. Say your piece and then...
Shut up.
Let's shut up.
Yes, I was taught, he who speaks first loses in my sales training back in the day, but it is really powerful if you can master it. It's quite difficult to do.
It is very difficult.
I was taught how to do that on the phone, telephone sales, which is much easier. It's much harder to do it in person, face to face, but if you can master that, then you're winning. And do you have a favourite book or TED Talk?
Well, books, I get sent books quite a lot actually, which is quite nice. Everything from books about beer, which is very nice.
Lovely.
So, ex-planners who go on to another career, and so I've read most of those. They were very good. But no, one that sticks out most recently was a book called The Shallows, written by Nicholas Carr, which is about how the internet's changed the way we think.
Oh, great.
And that's quite a scary book.
Is it?
Yeah.
Scary good?
Scary as in our understanding of the brain has improved immensely, and this whole thing around behavioural economics and all this sort of stuff, and understanding that the brain is a living thing and it isn't static. I think it was about 1987 when they actually finally discovered that your brain doesn't stop growing at the age of 16 or whatever, and it all sort of opened up. So the attention deficit problem that we've got with a multitude of devices, this guy wrote a book about literally how the brain was rewiring itself, and that was quite a scary book, and even to the point where in writing the book he had to go up a mountain with no Wi-Fi in order to finish writing the book because he couldn't concentrate.
Fantastic.
But that was a really interesting book.
Oh, well, fantastic. Well, we're going to give away a copy of that for our listeners. Okay. So that's going to be this month's prize. Fantastic. Tony, that has been extraordinarily interesting. Thank you so much for giving up your time and coming to join us. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be giving away a copy of Tony's book recommendation, which is The Shallows, How the Internet is Changing the Way We Think, Read and Remember by Nicholas Carr. So join in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #SmallSparkTheory, and we'll pick a winner and send a copy in the post. Join us next month when we're going to be talking about negotiation with lawyer, coach and negotiation expert Hilary Gallo. You have been listening to Small Spark Theory, brought to you by Gunpowder Consulting. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets, #SmallSparkTheory. The podcast is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann. Our editor is Claire Aban, and our producer is Isabel Jarvis. Music is provided by Duke Deck, available at dukedeck.com. This episode was recorded at the pod at White City Place. For more information and to download further episodes, head to our blog at gunpowderconsulting.com, and if you like what you hear, head to iTunes and leave us a star.